Hey, I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain, and today I'm going to be showing you how to rebuild the cylinder head off of our 2023 YZ450F. Now this process will work for any of the reverse cylinder heads from Yamaha, whether it's a 250 or a 450, and it can be the YZs, the WRs, or even the FX models. Now, whatever bike you're working on, there have been some revisions throughout the years, so make sure you reference your model-specific service manual throughout the process. Now, with that being said, there's a lot of detailed checks and measurements that are outlined in the manual that if you want to do that and go that far, you definitely can. The main thing we're doing here, we're taking a look at this cylinder head while we're doing the top end and our piston replacement on our bike. And we just want to verify that everything's good. So I'm going to give you some simple checks, and that way you can tell if something is wrong with your cylinder head without getting crazy with measurements. And that way you know whether or not you need to bring this to a machine shop or replace the head, or maybe you just need new valve stem seals. With that being said, you're gonna save a lot of money by doing this job yourself. So right here, we've got a breakdown of what a dealership would normally charge and how much you'd be saving. So again, you're gonna save a lot of money doing it yourself. Let's get into the process. Now, every rebuild is gonna look a little bit different depending on what you need to do. So the whole reason we're going into our cylinder head is we're really just gonna be replacing our valve stem seals. We're freshening up the top end and we wanna make sure those are good. But other people, you might have other issues going on, whether you tried to do a valve adjustment and you had no clearance, the valves are smoked, so you might need valves, valve guides, things like that. In either case, we have the parts and the special tools on our website. So make sure you click the link in the description below for whatever you need. But right here we have these valve stem seals. These are from Tusk. And then these are your must-have tools. So a valve spring compressor is really important to get this job done. We're also going to be using a magnetized flat blade screwdriver. We've got a pick, needle nose pliers, a 7mm deep socket. We also have an 8mm socket and 5mm Allen. Now, right here we just have some common hand tools, ratchets, 1/4-inch drive, torque wrench, and I'm also using a centering punch. And then right here I have some special tools that you don't necessarily have to have, but they are nice to have. So it's a 0 to 1 inch micrometer with some small hole bore gauges, and that can help give you confidence in whether or not you're making the right repairs. But we're gonna try to give you an idea of whether or not things need to be done by doing visual inspections. Now, back here, I've got assembly lubes. You can see we have a wide variety on our website. Just make sure you have some assembly lube. And then over here, I have cleaners. So you can use carbon remover. We also are using contact cleaner, and then glass cleaner, the spray bottle. That's just to help clean up the cylinder head. And then I'm using a measuring cup with a little bit of solvent to test the valves. And that's one of the big checks we're gonna be doing. Over here, I've got a drain pan, safety glasses, rubber gloves, and some rags. All right, to start out, we've done a pre-clean on the cylinder head. Now, I know you probably washed your bike before you ever took it off, but you can see on ours, it was pretty messy, so we recommend putting your valve cover on for a minute and covering up any passageways, giving this a good scrub. On the bottom, to clean the combustion chamber, you can use a little bit of oven cleaner, but if you do that, only leave it on for 10 minutes-ish and get it cleaned off because it can damage this material. A safer option would just be to use some carbon remover, and you can let that sit on there longer. We did the oven cleaner on here for a few minutes and it actually did pretty decent. With that said, you also want to make sure the sealing surface for your head gasket is nice and clean. You also want to take a look at this exhaust side. We'll clean this up a little better as well. Now, with that being said, if you want to verify whether or not you need to have machine work done on your head or not, one thing you can do is use a little bit of solvent. We've got some in our measuring cup, and I'm going to pour this down the intake tract, and we're going to see if this leaks out by the valves. So if it leaks out, we know we don't have a perfect seal and that we need to make some repairs. So you can watch that for a minute. Ours is staying dry. So with that being dry, I'm going to do the same thing on the exhaust valves. So same thing on the exhaust valves, and we're pretty much filling the port all the way up just to verify the level is above the top of the valves. So you can see we have a very light seepage out of these valves, and we're gonna wanna take a look, see if there's a little bit of carbon buildup or if we actually need to machine the seats and replace the valves. Now, if you didn't see any leakage around the valve faces and you're just doing a top end, all you would really need to do is remove the valves and install your new valve stem seals. But for us, we're gonna be inspecting these and taking a close look at those exhaust valves. Now, from here, we're gonna go ahead and start disassembling this. There's two ways to do it. You can use a punch and hold this up in the vise as you take everything apart. That's probably the easiest way, but it's a little bit harder to show you guys exactly what's going on. So we're gonna take it apart right here on the bench. So all we need to do here is find the right size adapter. So you can see this one might be a little small for that valve. So we'll clip that adapter onto our valve spring compressor. This side's gonna sit on top of that valve spring retainer. And then on the other side, you're gonna have this round end that's gonna sit in the middle of the valve. Then you can adjust it from both sides, and we're gonna compress the spring just enough to expose the keepers. And we'll use a magnetic tip screwdriver to pull those out. Then as you take this apart, make sure you keep everything in order. All of these parts wear together, so you want to keep everything with the original valve. Then we can release the tension on the spring. You're going to remove the valve spring retainer, the valve spring, and then before you can remove the valve spring seat, you need to remove that valve stem seal. So we're gonna pull the valve out first. And before I pull the valve stem out, I'm gonna make a check. So I'm gonna push this down just a little bit. You want the valve a little open, just enough to where you can grab it. And you wanna wiggle this back and forth. And you should have a little bit of clearance between the valve stem and valve guide, and that's what the wobble is. But if you have a lot of wobble, that means you're either gonna have to replace the guide or replace the cylinder head. I'm gonna rock it the other way, see if it's any different. So it feels like the play is the same both ways, and there's not a lot of play. So I like that. We can take some measurements, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But from here, we're gonna do those same steps on the remaining valves, and then we're gonna clean the cylinder head up. And again, you can use that carbon remover to clean down the ports, but for us, we're actually gonna be using a soda blaster and ultrasonic cleaner. All right, now to remove the valve stem seal, I'm just gonna use some pliers and gently rock that back and forth and pull it out. And as you do this, gentle is the key. You don't wanna damage this bore right here where the bucket rides. And then with these spring seats, they tend to stick in there, so a lot of times it's gonna be easiest just to spray some contact cleaner down in there, use a pick and a magnet to pull that out. And now that we've done that on this valve, we can do the same steps for the remaining valves. Again, keep everything in order throughout the process. Now I'm going to remove this intake flange, and from here I can clean the cylinder head up and get it ready for inspection. All right, so we've done a lot of cleaning up to this point. We've got our head clean, our valves clean. We still have some oil and stuff on our springs and retainers, so we'll go ahead and clean those off. We also have the 2 bolts with the copper washers we pulled out of the head. We're also going to wipe down our intake flange. Now to inspect the cylinder head and the valves, there's a lot more measurements you can do that are inside of your service manual. But the main things you want to be paying attention to are, 1, the valve face. So at the outer diameter of this valve, the angled portion, that's your valve face. You want to make sure that angle is straight across. You don't want to see any damage or wear there. So if it's cupped out, or if you see pitting there, then you want to replace your valve. And as these wear out, they'll get kind of a sharp edge. So that's another telltale sign. But with that said, these ones are looking pretty good. So we also want to look at the corresponding valve seat, and you're going to make a similar inspection there. You just want to look for any signs of damage or pitting. If that valve seat is damaged, you're either going to want to get the valve seats cut or replace the cylinder head. And then you want to make all those same inspections on the remaining valves. Now with our exhaust valves, we did have some solvent leaking past when we did our test, and we found the leak was caused by some carbon buildup. So we've gone ahead and cleaned all of that off, and the clean parts passed our inspections, so we are ready for assembly. Now one other common fail point for cylinder heads is the valve guides themselves. So if your engine has a lot of hours on it, they might be worn out. So you want to check the valve stem to valve guide clearance. So the intake limit for our bike is 0.08 millimeters on the intake, or 0.0032 inches. And then for the exhaust, it's 0.10 millimeters or 0.0039 inches. And to take that measurement, we've got a micrometer. Just measure the valve stem, and then you're also going to take a small hole bore gauge, adjust it until you feel a slight drag just inside of the guide, then measure it with a micrometer. And then take the valve guide ID measurement and subtract the valve stem OD measurement to get your clearance. If your measurement is over the limit, you'll be looking at either a new head or getting new valves and guides installed. If you go this route, make sure you get the valve seats machined at the same time. And then one of the last things we want to check is the free length of our valve springs. So we're going to just use our digital calipers. The intake limit is 36.65 millimeters. The exhaust is going to be 37.34. So our intake is 37.8 and the exhaust is 38.56. And as you measure this, just make sure you're not by where the spring ends, you're on the flat portions. Now, if your spring measures close to that service limit, you might want to think about replacing it, but with ours being well above that measurement, we are good to go. Now with everything cleaned up and inspected, we're ready to go back together. We're going to start out by lubing up some of these parts. I've got the spray-on lube. This is just going to be quicker, and then I do like to use this thicker stuff on the valve stems. Then we're going to lube up the valve guides as well. Now the next step is really important. We need to make sure we install these spring seats before we install those valve stem seals. Now to install the new valve stem seals, I've got my 7mm deep socket and just a little bit of grease on the end so it sticks on there. And that way I can set this into place and push the seal all the way on the guide. And you'll feel it clip into place. Just look down in there, make sure it's all the way on, and then we'll install the rest. All right, now for the combustion chamber side, I'm going to start with one of these exhaust valves. And I'm just gonna gently push that in. There's a little groove at the top of the valve that needs to work past that valve stem seal. And then for the valve spring, the painted side is gonna be facing up on all of these. But another way to tell if the paint is gone is the tighter coils. They're gonna sit closer to the cylinder head. So we'll set that in place. We've got the retainer on top, and then we're gonna use the valve spring compressor. We'll compress that spring down and install the keepers. Now to get the keepers in, I am gonna use a punch in the vise. It's gonna make the job so much easier. And then I'm just gonna use one of these holes for the cylinder head bolts to slide over that punch. Then we're just gonna take our valve spring compressor. We'll compress that spring down, and we're gonna use that magnetic tip screwdriver to install those valve keepers. And one of the reasons this is easier is gravity is gonna help you get these keepers in place. And I'm just using that pick to separate it from the magnet. Now with the keepers, you just wanna verify that they are fully seated in the groove on the valve stem. So as I pull this up, they should locate in there. Now we can do the same steps for the remaining valves. Next, we're going to reinstall the oil passage bolts. I'm going to use a little Loctite on them, or thread locker. Make sure the copper washers are in place. And we're going to tighten these down to 7.4 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to install our intake flange. All right, so there you have it. That's it for rebuilding one of these reverse cylinder heads from Yamaha. If you have any questions, leave those down in the comments below. And if you need any parts for your head, maybe you need special tools or anything for your top end rebuild, we have that stuff on our website. Just click the link in the description below. We offer free shipping on orders over $75. So take advantage of that and subscribe to our channel for more helpful content. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.